I'm driving on a steep, curving highway that goes up the side of Lookout Mountain. It's in the foothills of the Appalachians, up in the rocky triangle of land where the state lines of Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama intersect one another. At the very top of the mountain is a small town called Mentone, Alabama. Back in the early 1900s, Mentone was a resort area, and tourists came from around the world to its luxury hotel and its mineral springs. But the Great Depression pretty much put an end to that. The house I'm looking for is a few miles past town at the end of a two-lane road. It's a small, brown, one-story building with a bright red door and a white Isuzu wagon parked off to the side. Waiting for me on the porch is Tenzin Tharpa, sitting beside a large wooden wind chime carved in the shape of the Buddha. Tenzin is a tall man in his mid-40s. He wears wire-rimmed eyeglasses and looks a lot like a schoolteacher, which he used to be. He also wears the simple, dark red robe of a monk. Tenzin goes inside to pour us cups of hot tea, and then we talk. As I was driving up here, I noticed there's a Baptist church, there's a Christian fellowship, there's a Church of God of Prophecy. I guess it's safe to say you are the only Buddhist monk in Mentone, Alabama. Are you the only Buddhist in Mentone?
Well, the new owners of the guest house in town, I introduced myself as probably the only Buddhist monk on Lookout Mountain, and the fellow looked at me and said, "Well, let's keep it that way." Yeah, I'm sure I'm the only Buddhist monk in North Alabama, I think, actually. But there are a few other Buddhists in North Alabama, yeah.
Are there any Buddhists in Mentone?
Actually, there are 3 people that have taken Buddhist refuge since I've been here. So, yeah, a few.
I understand you lived in Atlanta for several years, and Mentone is as different a place as I can imagine from Atlanta. Why did you decide to move here?
Yeah. Well, I was president of the Buddhist Center in Atlanta for 2 years. But I was feeling that need for a simple life. I mean, to me, that's part of what being a monk is living a rather simple life. And it's something that has always appealed to me. And I began kind of putting out feelers for, a place where I could have time for meditation and prayer and be in a bit seclusion. And a wonderful lady in Birmingham named Jan Kushner said, "Well, Tenzin, I have a house up in Mentone you can use for a retreat for a few days." And I said, "Well." So I came up here and absolutely fell in love with one of the most beautiful spots on the planet. And I've visited many spots on the planet. But this one felt so good. And besides it being a beautiful place, the people here are just absolutely incredible as well. There are enough characters in this community that a Buddhist monk's just it's no big deal, you know. Of course, there are some people that just don't quite understand. But you would find the same thing in the middle of New York City. So it's it was a very, I felt very at home here, very comfortable here. Yeah.
What kind of questions do people ask when they meet you for the first time?
Oh, let's see. How did you wind up becoming a Buddhist monk? Yeah, that's very common.
And you say?
And I say, first of all, I grew up in a family that was not a church-going family, not devoutly anything, except, we went to church on Easter Sunday with our new suits and stuff. But not at Christmas. Christmas, that was for family gatherings, not for church, So I tell many people that it made it very easy for me, actually, as we all tend to do those spiritual searches where we try to find what resonates with us and what works for us and what's beneficial for us. And I had read a book in my freshman year of college called The Introduction to Zen Buddhism by D.T. Suzuki. And it blew my mind that there was another possible explanation for why and how things exist. I thought, my goodness. And then from that point, I became what I would call a book Buddhist, Oh, I read that book, and that agrees with me, and put that on the shelf, and read another one. Oh, yeah. And finally, I read a book by His Holiness Dalai Lama, and then I happened to see him on public television in Atlanta on a 1-hour special, and suddenly, it's like my heart caught up with my head, and it was, besides something that really just appealed to me as an intellectual thing. And I thought, aha. And that's when I began looking for a Buddhist center.
Something you said once that has stuck in my mind, and correct me if I misquote it, but something to the effect that Buddhism is less a religion as it is a way of comprehending reality. What do you mean by that?
Buddhism is very pragmatic, and it's hard to define as just as a religion. It's a way of engaging the world in a more productive manner, in a more gentle manner, in a more constructive manner. So it is a religion, it is a psychology, it is a philosophy. But it's also absolutely grounded in the thought that we as beings have a brain and a mind and we can think. The Buddha doesn't require you to let go of your own capacities to think and to understand. So it's very much based in, we bandy this word around, reality. What's true and what's real to a Buddhist is what we can verify by our own experience. It's not true or real because the Buddha said it or because somebody else said it. It's real because you and I both can verify it through our own experience. From that perspective, it appeals very much to our sense of logic. It requires no leaps of faith. In Buddhism, faith is something that comes later. As you test something and as you engage it, and then you find that it works and that it's real in your life, then faith begins to grow. At no time is there a leap of faith. Faith is a result. It's not a cause in Buddhism.
100 years ago in the South, there were a lot of ministers who were called circuit riders. They would travel usually on horseback to these, outlying communities, and on a rotating basis, they would hold services. What places does your ministry take you to these days?
Well, that's quite interesting that you say that. And that's pretty much what I'm doing now, I teach at a center in Chattanooga now, and a new center that's starting in Huntsville now. So when I first came back from taking my vows, when I first came back from India, Geshe Labsang sent me to Birmingham first, and I had a relationship there for 3 years. And then I started going to Knoxville, so I had my circle was Birmingham and Knoxville. But it's interesting that you mentioned this role, because traditionally that's not the role of a monk. If this were 100 years ago and I was a Tibetan, I would be in a monastery pretty much within a closed community of other monks. But as the Buddha Dharma comes to the West, we have had to adapt to the needs that we find here. When I took my vows, His Holiness Dalai Lama gave us specific instructions. He said, spend half your time in contemplation, meditation, and prayer. Spend half your time in the world doing as much good as you can. So I took that advice to heart. And it's been a precarious balance. The scales tip one way and then they tip the other. Going out and teaching to a lay community is not what would have been done 100 years ago. But it seems to be where the need is now. People have responded to the teachings. People seem to gain something from the Dharma, and I certainly don't mind sharing it.
To be the devil's advocate for a second here, you don't evangelize, you don't proselytize, to which I think somebody in the evangelical tradition would say, well, if you have found something that is so good, then why don't you go up to people on the street and say, listen, you've got to take this path, you've got to learn about the Buddha?
Good question. I think the reason that we don't is truly from a respect for all spiritual traditions. As a Buddhist, I don't say that I'm the only one with the truth and that everybody else is wrong. I can't say Buddhism is best. I can say Buddhism is best for me. But we do try and do cultivate a sense of respect for anything that does anyone some good. And His Holiness Dalai Lama says that religion is like medicine. And everybody's not sick with the same thing. And he even further says that he doesn't think it would be a good thing for there to be one unified world religion. He said he thinks that's counterproductive. He said much better would be a great respect among all religions for each other.
This is Dale Short reporting from Mentone, Alabama.